welcome you all to this evening's International Women's Day discussion, which is hosted by the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership and our friends at Ipsos UK. Now, this annual gathering has almost become a valuable tradition in our annual calendar. It is a time for us to celebrate achievements. It's a time for us to reflect on progress. It's a time for us to renew our commitments to advancing gender equality, in fact, inclusivity in all spheres of society. And I'm delighted that universities like King's are able to play an important part in this mission. We produce research that shines a light on the barriers women face. We prepare graduates who will build a more equitable workplace and communities. And our universities stand at the intersection of past achievements and future possibilities. And every year I look for what has changed this year incrementally in our step forward. And I'm very proud to say that this year, King's promoted more women to the rank of professor than men. This is the first time it has ever happened in the history of King's. Now, I don't know all the other universities, but I'm pretty sure it's close to the first time it's ever happened in the history of any Russell Group university. So I think it does deserve an applause. The thing I will say about these overnight achievements is that they take 20 years in the making. So while that 50% figure might have become 51 last year, the journey didn't just start last year. It is really the effect of a cumulative set of changes that have happened over 10 years. And I think that's the lesson we'll have to keep in mind, that while the winds around equity swirl in different ways around the world, the path is long, and we will get there and we'll stay at it. So that's our commitment. And therefore, it's particularly fitting that we are joined today by someone whose career exemplifies both personal determination and a commitment to educational opportunity for all. Our special guest this evening, the Right Honourable Bridget Phillipson MP, who serves both as the Secretary of State for Education and the Minister for Women and Equalities. Bridget's journey exemplifies the mission that universities like ours are trying to achieve. She was raised in the Northeast by a single mother. She was the first in her family to attend university. She graduated from Oxford and then has reached one of the highest offices in government. Her story speaks not only to her exceptional abilities, but to the transformative potential of education. This transformative power of education to create pathways to leadership is something we're deeply committed to at King's. And to pursue that goal, I am delighted that the brilliant Professor Hee-Jung Chung, who you'll be hearing from soon, has recently been appointed as the new director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. And at the same time, the Institute has become a part of the King's Business School. Now, the Institute has had a remarkable history. It wouldn't be here had it not been for the vision, for the ambition, for the aspiration, and the contributions of its founding chair, and that's Professor Julia Gillard. But it wouldn't have been here if the King's Policy Institute had not provided it a home and nurtured it through its stage of development. And now it goes from where it does research and policy to where it will develop the business leaders of tomorrow. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to our long-standing partners on this particular day, Ipsos UK. For 6 years now, they have been fantastic collaborators, not only for this event, but also on our annual global study on the attitudes towards gender equality. So we're going to kick off this evening by hearing from Kelly Beaver, who's the Chief Executive of Ipsos UK. Welcome to you, Kelly, who will unveil findings from this year's brand new survey, which they've conducted with the team with the Global Institute of Women's Leadership. Following that presentation, we will hear from the Secretary of State, who will be in conversation with Julia Gillard, who's of course the chair of our Global Institute in Women's Leadership. So now it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Kelly, to the stage. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Shiraj, and thank you also to the team at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. I count 7 years, not 6, but hey, who's counting amongst friends? But it has been a fabulous partnership looking at gender equality and the perceptions around the world. Now, 7 years looking at gender equality, you might be wondering, well, what is there to talk about this year? And for many, quite frankly, it's been a year of business as usual. Not an awful lot has happened. Well, if your year's been like ours, it has been a busy 12 months. But let's not just look at the last 12 months, because if we do, we might find ourselves in spirals of depression. Instead, let's also look at some statistics. These aren't Ipsos statistics, but it's from a good friend of the House, which is John Byrne-Murdoch from the FT. And he's done some fabulous analysis looking at some of the trends that we're seeing in society over the last few decades. There are interesting trends in the first quarter of this century. Young women now outpace young men in higher education across a number of developed countries. And you can see how this has intersected and changed over time. They also, interestingly, are now starting in some of the developed nations to outrepresent young men in the labour market as well, and the UK is one of the countries where that's the case. Now, alongside some of these societal shifts, we're also seeing, and this is well mooted, a real widening of the ideology gap between young men and young women in a number of countries around the world. Now, this is not an aberration. You saw this in the US election. You also saw this more recently in the German election. The US election, we saw an 18-point lead amongst young women for Kamala Harris, comparatively amongst only 7% lead amongst women more broadly. And also in Germany, you saw twice as many young men voting for the far-right group, the AfD, comparatively to their female counterparts. The young females were more likely to give their vote to the left-leaning party. So this is real, and it's happening. So what's going on? Well, we've conducted a study. Lucky you. We've conducted another study this year across 30 countries, covering 6 continents, and over 23,000 adults around the world, to talk to them in more detail about gender equality, what's happening, and what their perceptions are today. But one of the things that we look at Ipsos more broadly is just tensions in society. And in fact, the decade that we're in today is something that we have termed the restless decade. A decade where we're seeing some of the value sentiments that we've been tracking over time start to move, and they don't normally move. They're relatively constant in society. And you can see this because tension is being put in on public perceptions at this point in time because of all the issues that are impacting at the same time. And when we look at the tensions that are actually being recognized in society more frequently than others, you can see here tensions amongst rich and poor, amongst people of different nationalities, between socially liberal and progressive ideas and those with more traditional values, and also those of different ethnicities. Those are the top 4 tensions around the world. Gender doesn't come in on the top 4, but it's still over half who believe that they see tensions in their societies between women and men. Now, what's happening amongst the generations? For those tensions at the top of that list, generations are feeling it in mostly the same way, to the same degree. But what's happening around gender and what's happening around age? There are definite generational differences in how people are feeling tensions in society. And you might have thought perhaps it was bigger between old and young. Actually, the gap in the generational, how people are feeling amongst generations and how they're seeing these tensions is greater when we talk about where are you seeing tension between men and women. Generation Z are now almost 20% more likely to say they see that tension in society compared to their boomer counterparts. And also women are feeling this tension more across all the generations. They're feeling it in their day-to-day. So what do these tensions mean for how people are saying they perceive gender equality? So now I've got some good news. And last year, and I think the year before, and possibly the year before that, when I came here, I didn't have an awful lot of good news to share with you. Today I have some. Even though we're seeing these tensions, and even though we're seeing these generational divides on how people are perceiving them, actually, still a high majority, 7 in 10 people around the world are saying that gender equality is important to them. And yes, even in the US, 6 in 10 say that it's important to them. In the UK and Australia, it's in the high 60%. Even in South Korea, which is the lowest performing on this score, over half say that they think it's important to them. So that's positive. And the second positive I want you to take away is actually that when we ask whether things have gone too far or not far enough when it comes to giving equal opportunities to women, on the balance, we still have more people globally who are likely to say it hasn't gone far enough. I know that 1 in 5 are still saying that it has gone too far, but on balance, we still have more saying it has not gone far enough. And then my last positive, perhaps, for the takeaway today, before I go back into some really highlights, we are seeing also a small proportion of people who believe that there's been a negative impact of some of the policies that have been introduced in countries around the world by either businesses or by governments. But it's only 1 in 6 who are saying that. We have reasonable proportions in and around 3 in 10 who would say, actually, there's been a positive impact or the impact is relatively neutral. So not as much backlash against those policies coming through in the data today. But there are critical attitudes really persisting amongst young men, and this is written large in our data this year. When you look at the differences between young men and young women on a lot of these sentiments, it is quite stark. We've gone so far in promoting women's equality that we're now discriminating against men. 6 in 10 young men believe that's the case. I define myself as a feminist. Only 3 in 10 young men say that today. And the differences between their female counterparts are quite stark. A man who stays home to look after his children is less of a man. Nearly 3 in 10 young men believe that's the case. And then lastly, the proportion who say that attempts to give equal opportunities for women has gone too far, 3 in 10 young men believe that's the case. These are still quite stark findings this year. So with that context, where are we heading? Well, progress is definitely at risk across the pond. And I was challenged not to talk about Trump in my presentation today. And I haven't yet talked about Trump. So what I will say is that across the pond, brand after brand, from the big banks to the movie studios, to all sorts of organizations, one after the other, are denouncing their DEI policies, whether it is the way in which they recruit, the way they look at the numbers, the way they put their targets, what they report in their annual reports, what they're putting on the bottom of their signatures. All of this is under pressure. And what we've seen so far in the UK and some other countries is actually it has encouraged people to reinstate the messaging that they have and to bunker down with some of that messaging. At Ipsos, obviously, we've done that, but you can see Deloitte as well, refusing to sunset in line with their US colleagues. But how that ripple from across the pond will end is yet to be seen. And one thing that comes through in our data is around this sense of diverging futures for young men and young women. We can see that people's outlook for young women, their perception of the fact that young women's futures, they're going to have a better future than their parents' generation, more likely to say that for young women than they are for young men. Couple that with some of the progress that has been seen and the perception of tension and concerns around Generation Z's concerns, this is could be quite a worrying cocktail to be taking forward in the future. So one of the things we've done is to have a look at where some of the countries rank on an index that we've created. On one side, you have those with high proportions who perceive tension between men and women. And on the other axis, you have belief in those populations that there will be more progress in the years ahead for young women than for young men. Now, South Korea, starkly in the top right-hand corner. The US, also in this right-hand corner box, where they have high proportions of people perceiving tension between men and women in their society, but also this sense of progress for women is moving at a pace faster than young men. What's comforting from this for the UK is that we're not in that top right-hand box. But what's concerning is that we are seeing some of the other indicators line up. We're just not seeing the level of tension come through in society just yet. And we cannot be complacent. So to finish, a few quick takeouts. There are clearly strong perceived tensions between young men and young women, and we need to understand what's driving that better. Secondly, we need to shift how we talk about progress. At the beginning, I showed you some stark statistics from the FT about females' progress, young females' progress. We need to equally have good stats on young men's progress as well, so that we have a universal narrative that this isn't a zero-sum game, because ultimately it isn't. And we do need to promote a mindset that that's the case. Thank you very much.
I wasn't sure whether to go in front of that or behind. Thank you very much, Kelly, for another fantastic presentation. We're going to come to discuss that presentation just a little bit later. But for this first section, I've got the great privilege of speaking to Bridget. You heard her CV before, and I think the only flaw in it was that you went to Oxford instead of coming to King's College London, but we can forgive you for that, I think, can't we? We can forgive for that. But I did want to start at the very beginning, because it does seem like a good place to start, with your family background and your motivations for becoming involved in Labor politics. I mean, you didn't come from a privileged background. If anything, you came from the reverse. Can you tell us a bit about that and what shaped your views about Labor politics and gender from your family background?
Yeah, so as you've heard, I grew up in the northeast of England in the 80s and the 90s. It was a tough time for the community. I grew up in a council street. There were high levels of unemployment, high levels of crime. It was a tough time all round, and I'll return to gender, but I think there is also that really important strand around socioeconomic disadvantage and class as a part of that, alongside, that shapes my politics alongside gender. My mum was a feminist. She had been involved in the kind of 70s women's movement, got involved in a lot of that self-organising that went on at the time, and as a result was involved in opening one of the very first women's refuges in the northeast of England, and was a real trailblazer. I then came along slightly unexpectedly, and that rather changed things. And it was at a time when childcare wasn't really particularly well available for women. My mum brought me up on her own. I'd never met my dad. He had no involvement in my life, and that meant that my mum wasn't able to work for a period, which obviously when you've only got one income anyway, and that income is connected to social security benefits, it can be tough. But I was always pushed to not be held back by the norms of the time, to be confident in what I could achieve. And my mum was also a member of the Labour Party, so I would go along to things with her, because if I didn't go with her, she didn't get to go because there was no childcare. So I spent quite a lot of time kind of hanging around, you know, playing outside the Miners' Hall where we used to have a lot of these meetings. And what was really phenomenal was the involvement of women in Labour politics. Now, people might have a certain worldview about the northeast of England. We're obviously an area of lots of traditional heavy industry, quite male-dominated heavy industry. But alongside that, a really strong tradition of women shaping and being involved in the Labour movement. And it was a lot of those really tough, fierce women who made a lot of the decisions about what went on locally. And there's one member of the party who, if you wanted to get things done, then you needed to speak to Vera to sort it out. Vera Bryden, who to this day has been now a member of the Labour Party for over 75 years, and we celebrated her 75 years as a Labour Party member just the other year. Even now, she's still telling us what we need to do and what we shouldn't be doing. And it's that kind of tradition, that the women's sections that we had in the Labour Party was such an important way of encouraging women to get involved in political activity. And what was incredible about Vera was not just the contribution she played. She never actually sought elected office, but she played such an important role in encouraging so many of us to stand for elected office. And when I was selected as the Labour candidate in 2009 in Houghton and Sunderland South, Vera's stamp of approval was absolutely central to winning that selection, because people respected the integrity and the determination that she brought. And there's a really strong and powerful tradition that I don't think we talk about enough around the contribution of women to the Labour movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were pre-selected and entered Parliament very young. And coming from that background with lots of strong women around, your mother, strong Labor women, Vera being the gatekeeper, when you came to the Parliament, how did gender interact? I mean, for a young woman entering Parliament, I'm assuming that there were barriers, that people had doubts because you were young, doubts because you were a young woman in particular, probably a lot of focus on appearance, those kinds of things. How did you live it? What did it feel like?
I mean, I was able to benefit from so much of the progress that others had delivered. So when I was elected in 2010, I was serving alongside fantastic women like Harriet Harman, who had really, really led the charge to get more women into Parliament. I think what's also really, I reflect on, you know, my own local party members and my constituents who did put their trust in someone who was at that point quite young. And I think, again, that speaks to sometimes people can hold preconceived ideas about what certain parts of the country, a very traditional Labour area, what people might think. Actually, they took a risk on someone who, like me, who was quite young. And I'll be, you know, forever grateful for the opportunity that they've given me to serve. What's also lovely in a kind of full circle way is that a key member of my team at the Department for Education and working alongside me on Equalities is Jackie Smith, who was the first female Home Secretary in a Labour government, who is now back working with us in government. So there are so many fantastic women, and there are Conservative women from other parties too, who've really blazed a trail and made it far easier for someone like me back in 2010. We've made a lot of progress since then too. You know, just over 20% of women in Parliament in 2010. Now it's over 40%, more than 50% in the Labour Party. Big strides forward in quite a short space of time, but not complacent about the change that's still needed.
And because you got into Parliament young, you married, you had your children as a Member of Parliament. Can you talk to us about balancing that? Pretty crazy?
So both of my children have been born while I've been a Member of Parliament, most of the time as a backbench MP, which I'll be honest does make it a bit easier. It is tougher as a government minister, but they're now a bit older, so they need you in different ways at different times in their life, but it is a bit easier. But part of the reason that I'm able to do this job in the way that I need to do it is because I also have a really supportive husband as well, who we share family responsibilities. And I think that is also the shift that I've seen in Parliament amongst many of my male colleagues. They want some of these changes to happen as well because they want to play a full role in the lives of their children. And some of the changes that we've seen in Parliament around, for example, the opening up of a nursery, which is also available for staff to use who work there as well as for members of Parliament, was an important innovation. But I suppose, like any parent that, you know, tries to juggle work and family responsibilities, you try and kind of muddle through and do your best sometimes.
In the Australian Parliament, we changed the non-members bar into a childcare centre, and mostly people think the behaviour's improved as a result.
Very similar, actually. It was a bar that it was before my time, but it was a bar that they converted into the nursery, and here too.
Yeah, there's a theme going on here. You did a long, hard slog in opposition, and then had the opportunity to move into government last year. And with, you know, the huge portfolios that you have with education and with the Equalities portfolio. I mean, stepping in, it seems to me a madcap system here in the UK where you're literally up all night and then they're swearing you in and then work starts. We do it in a little bit more of a civilised way in Australia. I'll talk to you about that later. I do think some changes are needed. But can you just talk to me a little bit about the emotion of that moment? Yeah. You'd done 14 years in opposition. Come to it young, perhaps thinking that you'd get an opportunity to serve in a government quite quickly, and it took that long. What did it feel like on election night?
I mean, it all still, even to this day, feels slightly unreal. When I walked in here and I see my name up there, I kind of think, oh, wow, that is, you know, it's still, it's wonderful. It's such a privilege. And you're right. So obviously all day on the Thursday, out knocking on doors, both in my own seat and also in a marginal seat down the road on Teesside. Then my constituency is the first in the country to count, so we announced pretty early, which meant I could quickly stop by my election party and then got in a car down to London to do media first thing in the morning, because I'd been elected and therefore, unlike others, was able to get down. So didn't sleep at all, stayed awake watching the results coming in, and then takes us through to, I think it was around 2 in the afternoon when I got the call to go to Downing Street. So I'd been up really since Thursday morning, and then that takes us to kind of 2 o'clock on Friday. I mean, walking up Downing Street, I mean, I'd been in Downing Street a couple of times when I was a candidate when we were last in government. It was an incredibly, a really emotional experience after so long. But not for me, for the chance to make a difference to this country and to deliver the change that I know is desperately needed for the people that for 14 long years sent me to Parliament with the hope of delivering change. And now the opportunity to make that happen is an incredible responsibility. And every day I feel so lucky to have that opportunity. Very, very few people ever get that opportunity. And every day when I arrive at the department, I remind myself who I'm there to serve. And it is kids from communities like the one I grew up in who have the most to benefit from the change that I'm determined we deliver.
Absolutely. And I do want to focus now on some of the policies, for everyone, but with an impact for women and girls that I know are close to your heart and you're trying to make a difference on. One of them is tackling violence against women and children. Now, this is a topic that I think we've all discussed over a very long period of time. Governments have tried to make a difference, but it's a very difficult problem to change. What do you think the government can do differently in this space that would be more impactful than the policies of the past?
So we do have a mission as a government to halve violence against women and girls over a decade. That is really ambitious, and it involves big reform to how we encourage people to report domestic violence and sexual violence, how we make sure we've got more timely prosecution and charging. I mean, what we've inherited is absolutely dismal. I mean, the fact that so few cases ever result in prosecution, particularly where it comes to rape, is frankly shocking, absolutely shocking. So a lot that we need to do. So there are those reforms and the reforms that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is leading for us. I think there is a wider question about attitudes, and we've obviously seen, some of the polling that Kelly's presented tonight. There is more I think we need to do around supporting our young people to understand what healthy relationships look like, and we'll be setting out more content to support that within schools, including around issues around consent, where I think particularly what a lot of young people will be exposed to in the online space can be seriously damaging and harmful. And there is more that we as a government will do to ensure that our young people have age-appropriate access to really good quality teaching around all of that.
In Australia, that has been a huge issue, and actually some of the lead activists of the teachers' consent movement are in the room tonight, and that's been education about consent integrated into the national curriculum in an age-appropriate way. I mean, you personally must see some of the misogyny that is online and which is directed at women politicians, women in the public square for other reasons. And there's, the impact that it has on attitudes and the potential to create the kind of disrespect which then moves for some people into violence. I mean, given the temper of the world appears to be away from social media regulation, less self-regulation, how do you think we can tackle that kind of misogyny?
It's a really tough one, and I think if we knew the full answer, we might have fixed it by now. But I think, we are acting around implementing the Online Safety Act and what more is required in terms of regulation. The work that Peter Kyle is leading for us on that. I'd say alongside it, it's clearly a big issue, but there is also a degree to which I think people feel empowered by what they see. Those echo chambers that allow for people to kind of self-reinforce some of those views. And I think alongside that, I always feel a responsibility as a woman politician not to make everything sound so terrible that we risk not want other women wanting to come forward. Like, you know, everything, there are ups and downs, and you do get, the treatment you get as a woman politician is different for a range of reasons. The names that you call, the way that you describe, the way that people talk about you, especially how you appear, just don't apply in the same way for men. But I really want that next generation of women to come forward, to stand for elected office and to take on responsibility. So I always slightly worry about making sure that there's balance in terms of what I say there. But I think we have responsibilities as those of us who are elected in terms of the language that we use, how we approach political debate and the nature of that debate. And I think as political parties, we have responsibilities around the people that we're putting forward for elected office. And I look, for example, to reform. 5 MPs, all men, one of whom has a conviction for assaulting his girlfriend and was sent to prison for that. And I think that sends a pretty terrible message to the country. You know, you pretend you care about domestic violence, about violence against women and girls, and you allow someone to come forward as a candidate and to be elected to hold a very important position within our country, someone with that kind of history. If I were a woman, if I were a woman wanting to seek out, help from my member of parliament, yes, it presents some serious questions.
It certainly does. And it brings us really to the research questions and the nature of the political moment we're living in now. We've been doing this, as I think Kelly said, for 7 years, and I keep waiting for Kelly to come in with research that is like, thumbs up, it's all good, whereupon I'll do a short little dance or something like that, and then ride off into the sunset and spend my twilight years reading books and drinking red wine. This is the vision for the future. But we're not there yet, no. And we're not there in a very visible way, because diversity, equity and inclusion have curiously now become political flashpoint words because of the actions of the Trump administration. And the fact that national government, let alone of a nation of the size and heft of the US, would think that there is political advantage to be struck in campaigning against diversity, equity and inclusion. It does make me think, what have we been doing wrong? Why haven't we carried the population more profoundly along with us on these questions? And as Kelly's research shows, it's not all one way, but we're not winning the argument in the court of public opinion as profoundly as we would like to. How do you think about that?
So I think there is an important point around really positive male role models within all of this, and making sure we've got the right role models and the right routes for our young men too, who I think many of whom feel rather lost at the moment. Alongside that, where it comes to equality, and I think particularly where we're talking about the role for business and the action that can be taken. Just one example of a practical example that I've seen that really brings to life why this matters in practical terms, in business terms, and why there is significance behind it. During National Apprenticeships Week, I visited Hinkley Point C and visited the college nearby as a part of that. Met with some amazing female apprentices in areas that are traditionally quite male-dominated, but where the employer was determined to recruit more women into nuclear. And when I was asking them why that was, part of their answer was that in a kind of safety critical area such as nuclear, actually having a range of people from different backgrounds with different perspectives, they regarded as a business as being really important. So they said, look, we want more women to come and work here because we think it's a good thing that we're creating all of these jobs. We think as a point of principle, we should be making sure these jobs are available to the entirety of the local workforce. But actually there's a good solid business case for making sure that we've got a diverse workforce, because if you're in that moment when you've got big decisions to take, you want a range of opinions. You don't want groupthink mentality. So I think it matters in practical terms as well as it being, there's a moral imperative behind it.
I'm going to invite Kelly now to join us back on stage and join this conversation with her research work. The multi-talented Kelly, thank you very much. And Kelly, I'm going to stay on this business point because your research does show on business, and obviously the Global Institute for Women's Leadership is now at home in the King's Business School and very happy to be there. When we look at your research over the 30 countries, around a third of people say gender equality policies adopted by businesses have had a positive impact on society, so that's good. But roughly the same proportion, so another third, say either that these policies have made no difference or have had a negative impact. You know, why do you think people are so divided on this issue? It sort of links to the questions that we just discussed about why DEI has become such a political flashpoint.
Surmise what's going on behind some of the data when you think about sort of tick box exercises and how people perceive some of the policies that businesses might put in place. I think some might be sceptical about how deep those policies really go. And I liked what you said, Bridget, about the fact that the businesses themselves need to own the reasons commercially, and not just because it's a good thing to do, around why they have DEI policies in place, and showcase it a lot more. At Ipsos, it's obvious why we need a diverse range of people working in the business. You cannot research topics around society without having a broad spectrum of society in your business. That's clear business sense. But then also taking that and saying, as a result of the fact that we have a diverse board, a diverse workforce, this is what the impact is on us as an organisation. And I don't think organisations showcase the impact of the diversity well enough and the commercial imperative.
Have you been surprised, the two of you, about how quickly some organisations have sounded the retreat, though, some businesses? I mean, I get the, you know, if you're a business contracting in America, I get the very practical case that you can't any longer contract with the government unless you're falling into line with the Trump DEI agenda. I do understand that. And I do understand too that there's a lively litigation industry in the US which is suing many businesses and organisations that have got DEI policies, and that obviously forces businesses to respond. But, you know, here, Australia, other parts of the world, you know, how quickly some have latched onto it and sounded the retreat. And how have you seen that?
Well, I look at some of the industries that immediately moved as well. Some of them were highly dependent on government contracting in order for them to do business in the US. So I think changing your own approach and your policies when governments change is not, we wouldn't consider that good business practice, but I am probably not 100% surprised to see, especially with Trump's, how do you say, sort of fickleness, you know, his potential to be quite upset at certain businesses and take it out on them in their contracting sphere, and he has all of that control, so I'm not particularly surprised.
And Bridget, you and the government here obviously take a very different view.
I think it takes us back to the point around there are some really good examples of where businesses are making decisions that are not just a good thing to do in order to demonstrate they feel they're doing a good thing. But, you know, we've got big skills gaps in our country. That's, you know, an area I'm leading on as well. If we're not drawing on the full kind of workforce potential, then we're going to continue to have that. So again, another employer I visited, doing fantastic work training female plumbers, female electricians, had really targeted their advertising campaign in order to reach those groups. And they said, look, we want more women to work with us. We think that's a good thing, but actually we're not going to be able to recruit the numbers of electricians and plumbers that we need unless we start thinking seriously about how we make this feel like an attractive career for women. And of course it is an attractive career, and it should be seen as an attractive career. And what some of the women I met with said was, look, they'd kind of just drifted into what would have been regarded as quite traditional female industries after leaving school, and they'd never really thought that it was a career for them. So I think there is still a lot we can do to open up some of that. But I think business have a really good role in shaping it, but in demonstrating why it will be critical to delivering the skills and the people that they need, as well as it being just a good principle that we want people to have choice and freedom in their lives. I don't want people to feel, that they should be driven to a particular kind of career by virtue of being a man or a woman.
You see the government demonstrating as they are that it's important for the economy overall, for women and men to be playing both equally active roles. That's the sort of thing that may be missing with the rhetoric we're hearing across the pond at the minute.
Now, I'm going to go out for, I'm going to warn you in advance, it's going to be a very quick round of audience questions. I'll probably take 3 in total because I've pledged hand on heart that we're going to get Bridget out of here at the time she needs to go because she's got other commitments this evening. But before we go for that lightning round, it's a pretty difficult time in the world. Kelly, in this world in which we live and looking at this research with the Gen Z statistics not being what we would like them to be, to see the polarisation between men and women, to seeing young men, agreeing in greater proportions than older men with propositions like a man who stays home to look after his children is less of a man. With all of that, where do you find hope?
So when I looked at these statistics, some of the numbers they didn't surprise me because we've been doing this a long time, but they were quite extreme, especially some of those Gen Z ones. The piece that gave me hope was the quadrant at the end, where you see the UK down in the bottom right-hand corner, where we're not seeing the same level of tension in our societies yet, but it is bubbling up. I've got fabulous ethnography footage, and I say fabulous, but it's dripping with sarcasm because it's young men, Gen Alpha men and children, boys and girls, and the commentary between the two would really scare you. So it is there. It's just not as stark, and we have an opportunity to really take action.
And Bridget, I would imagine when you took that walk to Downing Street when you hadn't slept for 36 hours or whatever it was, this isn't how you imagined the first, 9 months or so of the government, that, the Prime Minister would be having to put so much of his energies into foreign policy, into defence and security, that those issues would be at the fore so profoundly that, we'd all be sort of sitting on the edge of our seats to see what was happening with a reciprocal tariff war breaking out around the world as the US moved and other nations responded. I mean, with those sorts of security challenges and economic challenges, which you probably didn't foresee, you would have needed a pretty good crystal ball. How do you individually find sort of hope in this period? I feel it myself. You get up in the morning, you get your cup of coffee, you're feeling pretty good about the world, and then you open 2 or 3 news sites and you think to yourself, right, why on earth did I do that? Now I definitely need a second cup of coffee. I think, that's a cycle that many of us are living through. It's not easy. How, against that backdrop, do you think a progressive government like the Starmer government can have hope and bring hope?
I've always, by nature, just been a very optimistic person. I genuinely think our country's best days still lie ahead of us. And I am incredibly proud of the leadership that Keir Starmer has been showing in seeking to ensure we get to a lasting peace for Ukraine, and the leadership that he has been showing on the international stage. I think there's an enormous sense of pride that we can take as a country in the role that we are playing. Big challenges ahead, but I feel such confidence in Keir's ability to lead that. I would say alongside it, it is critical that we as a government demonstrate that change is happening. People voted for change, not very long ago. They're impatient for change. I'm impatient for change. And that's why, the kind of delivery of domestic priorities alongside international obligations is incredibly important too. And the progress that we've been able to do, even in a short space of time, the breakfast clubs that we're rolling out, Skills England that we're establishing, curriculum and assessment review, much more besides childcare early years entitlements, crucial for women and for their contribution to the economy. So much we've achieved in a short space of time, so much more that we need to do. But I think even in the international context, going back to the contribution that people in our country can play, as part of that shift that we do need to make around increasing defence spend, that has to be about good, well-paid, highly skilled jobs in communities where they're desperately needed. And that's for young men as much as it is for young women. And I do think we have to address some of the challenges that our young men are facing too. More apprenticeship starts for both young men and young women will be critical. But returning, as it's international, as around International Women's Day, to the role for women. Again, as part of that visit I took part in during National Apprenticeships Week, meeting with a young female apprentice working on nuclear submarines who was, her career ambition was to go and work on AUKUS. I found incredibly powerful, really, really powerful. And the reason she said she wanted to do that was because she felt that was her contribution to our country's security. And I was really moved by that. And I think there must be so many more young men and young women who want to be a part of that shift. So we've got that volatility. But if we're going to increase defence spend, and we need to do that, how do we use that as a means of really giving people hope, especially some of our young people, about a brighter future, whilst providing that bedrock of national security?
I must admit I was very relieved when it became apparent that President Trump didn't know what AUKUS was, because if he doesn't know what it is and it's not in his line of sight, I think it's less risk than if it is in his line of sight. And as an Australian Republican, I'd have to say that royal family comes in handy from time to time, don't they? Very handy. Now we're going to go out for 3 quick questions. So I'm going to distribute them around the room so it's fair. So we've got one here. Yes, you, so nearest the microphone.
Hello, thank you. My name's Jackie Barrett and I'm from a company called Wider Thinking, and we roll out EDI awareness in organisations. And my question is, should we do the total opposite of what's going on in the US and actually mandate training and awareness and education within organisations? Not for the growth of my business, but for people to really, truly understand why this is important for society and for the economy and the prosperity of individuals and their business. Should we mandate it?
Okay, I'm going to hold that question. I'm going to collect up 2 more. So I'm going to make you get your steps in today. I apologise for that. You'll definitely hit 10,000. I'll go here in the front row. Thank you. Hi. Just the microphone's coming to you.
Hi, thank you. That was really interesting. I'm Lucy Blake. I'm a partner in a US law firm, Jenner & Blogg. So I was interested in Kelly and Julia's comments about the rising tensions, particularly amongst young people. And picking up as a lawyer, Bridget, on your comment about the Online Safety Act. But with so much content out there online, notwithstanding the efforts in the Online Safety Act to prevent harmful content, is there more that the government can be doing to encourage debate and teach debate to young people, to teach them how to evaluate different information sources, how to challenge and engage and respectfully disagree with one another, to have some impact on those rising tensions in a more positive way?
Thank you. I've got Alistair Campbell's voice in my head now saying, what is it? Disagree agreeably. And we'll just take one here, the red jacket, 2 in from the end, just here. Thank you. And then we'll come back for responses.
Hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm a Labour councillor, and in my day job, I actually work in defence, so I loved everything you said about defence. I got so excited. My company, we offer some fantastic apprenticeships. Sorry, I'm not trying to sell it here. But whether you want to work in the office, and we do some infrastructure, so whether you want to get your hands dirty and you want to go on the rail tracks and work on infrastructure, we offer them from the age of 18, and we pay for students to undertake their university degree. But I'm finding it, when I talk about this stuff, particularly in local schools, I find that they don't know that it exists. And even though I know there's like a collective database of apprenticeships, schools don't seem to be using it. And I just wonder what we need to do more to promote these fantastic apprenticeships. And particularly, I think these are great for children with SCN as well. It's another route to get into business, to be successful, or perhaps going to university and having to sit down and do all those exams. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to get responses. So Bridget, I think particularly that last question and this teaching debate to students and evaluation of information sources very squarely in your portfolios in both senses. Yes.
Fantastic to hear about the apprenticeships. More, please. We need more of them. And we want to work with business to create those apprenticeship opportunities, because for all of the reasons that you've set out around what it can mean for young people and their life chances, but also the impact it has on the economy too. I mean, the amazing impact that apprentices have on economic growth and on output. So much more to do in the context of increasing defence spend. On how we think about this in terms of teaching and wider understanding, there is a need, I believe, to equip young people with the critical thinking skills to challenge and to question what they see in front of them, not to take it at face value. Not just because some of what they might see online is potentially harmful or upsetting or can be unacceptable in terms of the age-appropriate nature of it, but also the degree to which hostile actors will be using the online space to spread, to undermine our national security, and the degree to which young people need to be able to really think about that and challenge what's in front of them. Now, we've got a curriculum and assessment review that's underway at the moment that is looking at what happens within our schools. I think there is more to do. I think there is also more that we will set out around content in terms of healthy relationships, again connected to some of what young people will sometimes see online, that presents a view of what relationships look like that I think a lot of us would find deeply concerning. So there is that. And just very finally, given where we are this evening, I think freedom of free speech, academic freedom in the context of higher education is also critical. And it's why I've been clear that we've set out measures around how we will support universities to ensure that they are able to provide an environment of challenge, of disagreement, and where, yes, sometimes that will involve being exposed to things that you might disagree with, you might not like, you might find challenging. That's part of what education should be about. We should question and challenge, we should think and reassess our views. And yes, sometimes that does mean finding that you disagree with people, and that's good. It's good to find ways in which, I think, you know, as the slide shows, at a time of tension, actually having that opportunity to discuss why you disagree, but recognising that actually that's fine, that's healthy within a democracy, I think is really important. And all of our educational settings, including our brilliant universities, have a role, I think, in it really encouraging that free expression.
And Kelly, the question at the start about EDI, I'd have to say I'm sure your business is doing very high quality work, but the data is quite equivocal about the impact of diversity training in companies and whether it overcomes stereotypes or reinforces them. So I think there's some things to think about there. But Kelly, I'll just turn to you for a reflection too.
I think there are, you know, putting in place mandatory training pieces like that also run a risk of tick box mentalities amongst organisations. So I think, you know, base standards of respect, inclusion in organisations, etc., those kind of things, absolutely fundamental. And in the UK, actually, some of the stats and evidence that's been coming out after the DEI backlash in the US is people are actually leaning into it more in the UK. So it's had the opposite effect so far, early days. But I would say you need people to lean into that kind of training or development or whatever it is you were suggesting, rather than mandate it per se.
Well, thank you for those questions, and I'm going to conclude by saying Happy International Women's Day to all of you, and if I could invite you to thank Kelly and her team for their amazing work, and also Bridget for taking the time to join us. I know what it's like to be in government, I know what the pressures are, and we don't take your time for granted, so thank you for taking the time to join us.
Yes, brilliant job.
now invite, I'm a woman with many bosses, and two of them are gathering right here, but the one who's joining us is Stephen, who leads the King's Business School, which is where the Global Institute for Women's Leadership is happily at home. Stephen, over to you.
Is this on? Oh, right. Oh. Well, I just wanted to good evening. I'm Stephen Bark and I'm Executive Dean of King's Business School, and wanted to thank our amazing panel, the Secretary of State, Julia and Kelly, for a really inspired evening. Before we close, I just wanted to say a few words about what I hope we can achieve together. As we've heard, the Global Institute for Women's Leadership will be joining the business school, has joined the business school. And we've heard about the opportunities and some of the challenges that came through, I think, very clearly in Kelly's data. I think it seems to us that, in a way, and as we've heard tonight, the workplace is very much the epicenter of a lot of the discussions around gender equality. They're the fulcrum of many of the issues that we're hearing about. And I think in the business school, we're seeking to kind of reimagine the modern workplace. I read today in the Financial Times that one of the big 4 professional services firms is now linking bonuses to attendance. And I immediately thought, well, what does that mean for gender equality? What are the consequences of that for gender equality? So we very much want to, with GIWL as part of the business school, we're here to work with leaders and organizations, with supporters like yourselves, to really think about how we can future-proof EDI. And I think for us, this is also a very personal mission. We heard earlier from the Vice-Chancellor about the number of women that we're promoting at King's. If we look at our student side as well, the business school is quite unusual in the sense that we are a majority women business school. In other words, 55% of our students are women. But clearly we know there's a lot more work to do to challenge assumptions and remove barriers to gender equality. So there's a lot of work to do. I think under Hee Jung's amazing leadership, I think we're confident of the future, and I feel very positive about the difference that the Global Institute will make in the years to come. So I just want to hand to Hee Jung just for some very brief final remarks.
Hello, everyone. I am the new director of the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership, Hee Jung Chung. I am the person that stands between you and the canapes and the drinks. So I'm going to make this really, really quick. I can't tell a lot about what I'm going to do and my plans, but there's some blogs and there's some information on our website, and there'll be more coming to you. But a little bit of snippet of information that you might enjoy is that I am South Korean, and as you can see, that makes my role even more urgent and necessary. Well, just to say, first of all, I just want to, we've been thanking Kelly, Julia, as well as, the Ipsos team, as well as Bridget Phillipson, but one other group that I want to thank is our communications and events team, who has yet again smashed it out of the park and organizing a fantastic event. So I just want a round of applause for them, please. And just to see the amazing work that they'll be doing again, I just want to showcase that in March, in a few weeks' time, we're going to have a Changemakers event, which is where we showcase and promote some of the amazing campaigning advocacy work that is carried out by our global majority women. Also in April, as Stephen mentioned, we're going to be doing a webinar about what the return to office mandate means for gender equality, but also business performance as well. And in May, we're going to be launching our very first kind of gender equality index, which looks at all of the UK localities in terms of not only inequalities between men and women, but also against men and women women and women to showcase what it is actually looks like in the UK, not at the aggregate level, but in your real locality. And we'll be producing websites so people could go in and actually play around with the data as well. So there's a lot of events coming up, so please stay tuned and please come and join us in our future events. But now, please go enjoy our drinks and canopies. Thank you very much.
also found